So good evening, everyone, and welcome. In case you haven't figured out, I'm not Gay Nicholson. Gay is actually quite ill these days, but she still is typing on a computer, so we know she's still alive and communicating, but that's about it. So I'm filling in, and my name is Don Barber, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things I might bring to this, but right now I want to set up our plan for tonight. So this is the fourth in a series of salons with the title of the group being the Climate, the Market, and the Commons, dealing with climate change. So the first session that we had, Salon, was climate change denial. We explored why are we denying that climate change is going on around us. The second one was on the technological response to climate change, what's out there, what can happen. And then the third one, which we just had 2 weeks ago, was the government response, and whether it's local or state or federal. And today is actually the people's response. And so this is the right group to have here because we are the people. We'll be talking about different ways that we can explore mobilizing a much larger and more engaged climate movement. Talk about identifying barriers people face when deciding to participate in climate and energy work, and also sharing examples of local initiatives that people can join or find leadership roles within those. So all of these were all well attended, and they were all videotaped, and two of them are on the website. And Chris, when is the third and fourth one going to be on? Third one's up. All right. So 3 are on. Fourth one that we're taping right now. So with that, I just want to thank the sponsors for tonight. First, PPM Homes is underwriting the video production. The video production is done by Chris McConkey Productions, and the video guys are all standing around behind cameras. There's also Bill Houston and Eddie Rodriguez. And then finally, we have Tom Rayer, who's doing the audio, sitting back over here in the corner. So not only are we're doing video, but we also have snacks in the back, and they were provided by Ithaca Bakery. And finally, Park Foundation is a prime funder for the Sustainable Tompkins. And so we always want to recognize them at one of our events. But having said that, I'm going to let Miranda talk a little bit about Sustainable Tompkins and how we're funded.
Thanks, Don.
Sure.
So can you all hear me? So as Don said, I'm with Sustainable Tompkins, a board member. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm really grateful personally for this chance to draw on our collective wisdom. As I've seen in the previous salons, it's not just the panelists who really have valuable things to share, but it's this collective reflection that allows us to better act quickly and wisely. So thank you so much for what you're going to be saying tonight. We are lucky, as Don said, that Park Foundation helps pay for these programs, but they purposely don't pay the full cost of our programming. They wisely push us to ask you to support us, and that is to invest in what you value. So if you find tonight's salon valuable, we hope you too will be moved to chip in. We understand that not everybody can give, but if you are able to do that happily and comfortably, the most sustainable way to support us is with a membership. It costs $30 a year. Unless you're a student, that's $15 a year. And there are forms at the back, or you can find online. But if $30 is not where you're at, or $15, any donation is really greatly valued. And there are baskets on the buffet table or at the door. This programming can't happen without your help. So thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Miranda. So I'll give you a brief overview of our agenda for tonight and timing so you can have expectations. There are going to be 3 short presentations by Reed Steberger and Miranda Phillips and myself. And then we're going to work on 3 questions, and they're right up here, but I'll read them to you in case that you're too far away. And you should think about these questions in relationship to what the presenters are saying. And then when we get to these questions, it's your opportunity to chip in, and hopefully we've created some thoughts for you to share with the group. So the first question will be, at the personal level, where have you encountered barriers, and where have you had success when taking climate action as a voter, taxpayer, consumer, culture maker, or community member? The The second question is, what are good ways to get others to join you on a particular task or cause and get them to act independently instead of being passive recipients of information? How do we make more self-starters out of people who already share our concerns so we can spread like yeast? I can tell you that this is Gay's language.
Like beer, right?
Exactly.
That's our message.
So what about reaching across the culture gap where climate change has gotten intertwined with other belief systems? There are a lot of new alliances out there. How can we build more? And then at 8:55, we'll bring this discussion to a close, but it'll be an opportunity for those of you who have events that have been planned around sustainability to let the group know what's out there so that they can join you as part of a building community. So I'll also review with you the ground rules, which are up here, for open-mindedness, acceptance, so that we suspend judgment of what others have to say, curiosity of what's been shared, and brevity, of course, because there's a lot of people here that are very excited about this issue, and I've known from the other salons that we can talk way past our 9 o'clock hour and have lots of energy, so we really need to give everyone a chance to speak. So that's our plan for this evening, and we'll just start out right off with the speakers. So the first will be Miranda Phillips. And Miranda is, you may know, is an educator by profession, a practitioner of mindfulness, the mother of 2 very young ones, one of whom was a regular attendee at our board meetings, and an active member of the chapter for Citizens Climate Lobby. In addition to her board work for Sustainable Tompkins, she serves on the Mini Grant Council and is a volunteer coordinator. Miranda.
I'm active. When Don shared this list, how are we active as a voter, taxpayer, consumer? I think we're all active in many of those ways. I'm active very locally in my yard, locally with Sustainable Tompkins, but tonight Gay asked that I tell you what I'm involved in at a national level, pushing for federal policy change. This is not to try to woo you to join my cause, though I would recommend it to anyone, but rather to offer it as an example of how one might get active at a policy level, and particularly federal policy level. So I volunteer with an organization called Citizens Climate Lobby. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I'm going to call it CCL for the rest of my talk. And if you're still curious about it at the end of my talk, I recommend checking out their website. It's really very easy to navigate, and there's a lot of excellent information there. Our single focus is to pass a federal carbon tax. It's really refreshing that the organization has a single focus. And I think that's part of its recipe for success. It's not just a federal carbon tax, but one that has all revenue returned to American households, a revenue-neutral carbon tax with all the revenue returned to American households. We feel that this revenue-neutral carbon tax is the most effective and efficient way to curb fossil fuel use and speed the transition to renewables. So I could share why we support a carbon tax and this kind of particular, this particular kind of carbon tax, and I'm happy to answer questions about that later. But since the focus of our evening is citizen activism around climate change, I'd like to describe CCL in 2 ways right now, as an organization and social movement, and what it's like for me to be a volunteer with that organization. So CCL as an organization and movement, since we said we want to talk about how do you mobilize large numbers of people for the cause, CCL is one model. It's a grassroots organization. It began 5 years ago, started by a businessman, a retired businessman in San Diego, a man named Marshall Saunders. He had been previously very, very active in microloans, making microloans in mostly in Bangladesh, and he personally made 1 million of these microloans, and this won him awards. At some point, he saw Al Gore's movie, and it really shook him up for many reasons, but one of them was that he suddenly realized, oh my God, if this climate change thing is really happening, Bangladesh is super low-lying. Oh my God, 20 years of work of successfully helping pull people out of poverty, it's just going to get washed away. So he said, I can't sit here and do nothing. Luckily, he had been involved with an organization called Results, which was a lobbying organization working on issues of hunger and pulling people out of poverty, which had a great system for organizing citizens to become knowledgeable and diplomatic and effective lobbyists. And he said, we can use that and we'll just apply it to climate change. So the system I'm going to describe to you was originally started for a different cause, and now it's been used because it worked. Millions and millions and millions of dollars have gone towards microloans because of that system, because of this organization Results. Marshall Saunders said, hey, we got to do this with climate change too. So that's what CCL is doing. And so it was started 5 years ago, and as testimony to its effectiveness, it's double the number of people involved has doubled every year. Started out with 12 chapters, and now there are over 200 chapters. We're in 3/4 of the congressional districts in the country already, and the aim is to be in all congressional districts by the end of next year. And it's doable at the pace that we're going. And the reason it's growing so fast is because, at least I feel, it's a great concept. This carbon tax with revenue returned. So that group mission, the carbon tax with all revenue returned, is based on input from experts of many stripes. It wasn't just one guy's great idea. They consulted with businessmen, economists, politicians on both sides of the aisle, and said, what do you think? Why do you think the previous attempts at carbon tax haven't worked? What would work better? Notable among these experts are some who sit on our board, namely scientists James Hansen, Catherine Hayhoe, former Republican politician from South Carolina, Bob Inglis, and economist George Shultz, former Secretary of State under Reagan, I believe. So not a shabby group, and very varied in terms of background. And therefore, the ideas that we're presenting are appealing to people as diverse. Our aim is to create political will for a federal carbon tax, and we're doing this in 3 ways. One is the lobbying piece, building relationships with our members of Congress, so each of us in our district. And the idea is to have a chapter in relationship with each member of Congress by the end of 2015. We're already 3/4 of the way there. That's piece number 1. Number 2 is working with our local media, which is like writing op-eds and PSAs. And the third piece is speaking with groups like you, or going into churches, or any kind of civic group you can imagine, to raise awareness. That we meet monthly as local chapters across the country, and we connect once a month by conference call as a whole movement to share progress and also hear from guest speakers who are relevant experts, so that we all become more knowledgeable steadily, and we can be that much better at doing our lobbying work and our writing work and our presentation work. So that's about CCL as an organization and movement. It's extremely organized, and it's mostly volunteers. There's a few paid staffers at the center, but mostly it works because they really know how to empower volunteers to take on leadership positions where they're at, and they make it very clear what all the roles, all the various roles that you might want to take on are, large and small. So you all know how your piece is connected to the mothership and why your piece is valuable, and therefore you can feel good about it, even if it's just, I take the minutes at the monthly meeting, or I started a chapter here in Ithaca. Or I'm going to DC in a few days. You can wave. Dory and Sarah and I are going to DC to meet with Reed's office. We are among 600 volunteers who are going to meet, each with their representatives, for the yearly conference where people all meet with representatives on the same day to make a big splash. We'll let you know how that goes. So for me, this has been a wonderful organization to volunteer with. Just a few words on that, and then I'll share the airtime. You'll excuse me if I'm enthusiastic. It's been a great experience for me. So I love their methodology, first and foremost. So in all our activities, the guiding principles are the same: appreciation and respect. This is so refreshing and unfortunately rare. In activism, in working with, or even talking about Congress. So when we meet with our members of Congress or write them letters, we begin with honest appreciation for something that member has done, even if that's really hard for us to come up with initially. Once we've come up with it, it really changes the way you view that person. So one of the things that was really helpful to me was they tell us, these people are just human. They don't have time to be experts on all the issues that they are supposed to vote on. They rely on experts to get them up to speed. And unless citizens step forward to be those experts, then moneyed interests will step in, understandably. It's upsetting, but it's understandable. And we need to be lobbyists just like those moneyed interests. And the advantage that we have is that we are also constituents. And that's really powerful. We may feel like the money speaks more, but actually being constituents is a very powerful force. And it's been wonderful. We spend no energy on diatribes, but rather focusing on the other person's humanity, and it makes it much easier to connect and start finding common ground. I love learning these skills, to be knowledgeable and diplomatic and honestly nonpartisan. Everybody talks about how great it would be to work with people across the aisle. This organization is really good at teaching those skills. I love that CCL volunteer work is manageable. As I said, they offer a variety of volunteer roles, large and small. I feel valued. I can see how my role relates to everyone else involved. I feel a real sense of community, both with my local chapter and with the larger. It's really a high to get on this conference call and hear people talking like, oh, this is what we're doing in Madison, and here's what we're doing in Oakland, and here's what we're doing in, Waco, Texas. The organization feels to me clear-eyed and realistic, but also positive. There's no doom and gloom, even though what we're working on is pretty dire. And it's in part because we have confidence about our tax policy, and it's in part because we share about progress every time we talk, and it creates a sense of hope and momentum. And there is momentum, as I said, about we're growing like this, and we have so many meetings in DC next week. And we are, because of this, starting to change the conversation. Folks on both sides of the aisle are voicing support, although for some, this is still behind closed doors. But next year, after the election cycle is over and the stakes are lower, we're going to start facilitating meetups between the people who have only said yes behind closed doors, to tell them about each other so that they know that other people have their backs and they can have more courage to come out and do this publicly. So in closing, I'll say I've found CCL work really empowering, and empowering in an arena where I had previously felt highly disempowered. That is in relation with my government. I've always been a voter, and I believe that voting and working hard to put forward candidates I love is still really key and necessary. But given that our favorites don't always win, I find it really refreshing and exciting and comforting to get involved in a way that, to know that I have recourse for working comfortably with the folks who are already in office. For me, it's been exciting to get involved in a way that feels not like pushback or a grab for control, but rather through relationship building, we start finding ways to partner with existing office holders for our mutual benefit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So our next presenter is Steberger, and he's a recent Cornell grad. And he was actually a driving force in the spring of 2013 behind the Youth Summit, which garnered our attention for sure. He's also a participant in Summer of Solutions and a leader in our local efforts to get institutions to divest from fossil fuels. And I believe you're involved with the Tompkins County Climate Protection Initiative as well.
I'm the assistant coordinator.
All right, so tell us more, Reed.
Cool. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, how's everyone doing? Good. Good. Okay. It's always nerve-wracking to be in front of people talking to you about stuff that I think. So to help me break the ice, just a quick show of hands. How many of you know the person like sitting to your left? Just a quick show of hands. Okay. So if you don't know them, could you just like say hi and your name and where you're from? And then if you know the person, find someone else. Okay, that's plenty of talking. That's plenty. Let's bring it back to me. Back to me. It's all about me right now. Come on. That didn't work at all. Okay, so tonight we're supposed to be talking about this question of, is it up to the people, right? And what does people power look like? We've talked about the market. We've talked about government. And I'm not by any means an expert on this question, but it is some of the stuff that I do. Like Don said, I work for the Tompkins County Climate Protection Initiative. I work in the youth climate justice movement. I am a young person, so is it up to the people? I am a person. And I also work with, on the side, I'm not going to talk about it so much, earth justice. Not going to talk about it as much tonight. It's still amazing. I'm a field organizer. I'm working with some of the folks in this room. So I'm going to talk about, the first thing I'm going to talk about is a little metaphor about fish and ham sandwiches. And the second thing I'm going to talk about is the climate bill in 2010 and some of the reasons it wasn't successful. And then I'm going to talk about youth climate justice a little bit and what it means to understand history in the United States and globally and how that situates climate work, how we situate climate work within that context. And then some of the strategies that I'm seeing in the youth sort of sub-branch of the youth climate justice movement and the ways that that part of the climate movement is drawing from strategies that have been used for a long, long time. So first things first, fish and ham sandwiches. This isn't my metaphor, it's Ed Whitfield's metaphor. Ed Whitfield actually was a student at Cornell. He helped lead the Willard Strait takeover in 1969. I got the chance to see him. He was a keynote speaker at the New Economy Coalition conference a few weekends ago. He now works for the Fund for Democratic Communities in South Carolina. So he was talking about this metaphor we use around teaching people to organize and teaching people how to help themselves. This metaphor of if you give a person a fish, they'll eat for a day, and if you teach a person a fish, they'll feed themselves for life. Okay, we all know the metaphor. And Ed made this point that what that metaphor assumes at a basic level is that there is this sort of available, accessible supply of fish that everyone has equal access to. And that the ocean is just this place that we can kind of throw our little line into and get fish whenever we want them. And then that fundamentally doesn't recognize how the world works. And if we had just started with a better metaphor, we might have actually just solved all of the world's problems a lot faster. And so you can think about another metaphor. You can give a person a ham sandwich, and they'll eat for a day. But if you teach a person to make a ham sandwich, you actually have to talk about the fact that you don't just start with bread and ham. I mean, we can use hummus. I know we're in Ithaca, so we can talk about hummus. Let's go back to that. You have to make the bread. You have to make the hummus. These things don't just come from some sort of unadulterated commons, right? There's land that this wheat grew on, and there are people who plant that stuff and who harvest it and who manufacture it and produce it. And then it gets shipped, and there are people who do the moving, and there are people who built the things who do the moving. And that there are all these resources that happen along the way, and there are people who are responsible for these resources, and there are people who own them. And you have to ask the question of who owns all of these things? And how are you going to make a ham sandwich if you don't have access to control over these resources? And so I think it's really important to sort of use that framework of understanding who has access to resources and who has control over them when we think about things like the climate crisis. Right? So just hold that metaphor, just let it like hang out somewhere in your brain, and it may or may not come up again in the rest of what I'm talking about. So let's jump ahead from abstract history into 2010. 2010, as you may know, there was a very important climate bill. It started picking up steam in 2009. I worked for an organization, or I interned for an organization in Washington DC. I was their first intern, or first student intern. They paid me way too much, which was very lucky. I worked in DC. The American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, authored like 50 pages of this 1,000-page bill, so I was really familiar with it. 2010, it picked up steam. It passed the House. It moved into the Senate. And I did sort of some of my first political organizing by organizing phone banks out of my apartment. I got pizza and beer for a bunch of college students. And we made phone calls to Tennessee and Mississippi to get senators to vote yes on the bill. And if we're familiar with some climate history, we know what happened. The bill failed. And we were all really, really sad. So that was some of my first political activity. And when that happened in 2010, the climate movement had this sort of crisis of identity, because sort of a decade worth of groundwork had been rolled into the strategy of getting a climate bill passed in the Senate, and it failed. And not only did it fail, but the United States went to Copenhagen later that year and had nothing to offer. So one of the organizations leading this campaign was called One Sky. It was sort of a predecessor and sister organization to 350.org. Some of you may know or have been involved in some of the stuff One Sky did. Now they combined with 350 a couple of years ago. They wrote an open letter about why their strategy failed, and it had a lot of really good points in it. But in addition to that, and what I've looked to more is, there was another open letter written in response to it, and it was written by a group of indigenous rights, environmental justice, economic justice, immigration rights, youth organizing, organizations, and it was addressed to One Sky and the climate movement. And it said, the analysis of why you failed acknowledges that, or why we failed, and why you also. You know, there's a you and there's a we in that, right? We agree with this emphasis that you had, that you didn't focus enough on grassroots organizing, you focused too much on Beltway strategy. But they went a little deeper, and they made a couple key points that I want to bring up now. And I want to bring this up as well in the context of, well, I'll get to that in a second. So one thing that they said is access was confused for influence, right? These environmental organizations had access to sitting in the rooms with senators, sitting in the rooms with corporations, talking about what a policy looked like. But it wasn't influence. They didn't actually have the ability to change what those interests were going to do. And one of the reasons I think is because, one of the reasons that they talk about, is because when we're working within the Beltway, if we're not focusing primarily on mobilizing our grassroots, we're never going to have as much power. Like, we just won't. I mean, it's almost like a different cultural space of folks who are in charge of these massive institutions with lots of resources and power. The other thing that they said was mobilizing was confused with organizing, and breadth was confused with depth. So there's a difference between a broad-based movement led by national organizations and a translocal struggle that's a network of local organizations working in their own context around a shared agenda. And I think my friend Farhad, who works for the New Economy Coalition, has this little phrase that actually has kind of like shaken up my brain and changed the way that I look at organizing, which is that we often say the word policy. We need policy. But what we really mean is we need political power. But we treat political power as if it's just policy. If we just got the right policy, things would change. We'll never get the right policy if we don't have political power. And political power is built at the grassroots, when you lead from the grassroots, and when that's what sets a national agenda, if you choose to work at the national level. The other thing that they said was targets were confused with solutions. So if we think about just CO2, we forget that this thing isn't actually about just carbon. It's about who has control over these resources, who has control over what kinds of fuels we're burning, who has control over these institutions. And that if we talk about things like the economics of carbon, the economics of CO2 and these various different chemicals and things that sort of float around all around us, we're actually going back into that arena where our opponents, these corporations and sort of unfriendly elected officials, have much more power than us. We have more power when we talk about our rights, when we talk about our communities, when we talk about things like our right to clean air and clean water and safe communities. So I read this, and it's influenced a lot of my thinking, a lot of the direction I've decided to put my work with TICP. And so the other context that I mentioned and said that I would get to later is, I'm getting into it right now, is I bet that a lot of us in the room have heard about this thing called the People's Climate March that's happening in September. Okay, if you haven't heard about it, it's this big march. It's supposed to be 100,000 people, at least, in New York City. And it's organized around a UN climate summit. It's not a binding decision-making summit, but it's a place for folks to talk about climate commitments. And it's going to be the last time, probably in a decade, where global leaders are getting together to talk about climate. Where heads of state are getting together, right? So presidents and prime ministers are coming together, not just their ambassadors and their negotiators. It's supposed to be the biggest climate mobilization that has ever taken place in the United States. The biggest one previously was the 40 or so thousand people we had in February of 2013. 2013? Yeah, 2013. Down in DC. 2012? Damn, no, 2013. Was it 2013? Yeah, 2013. Okay. Okay. And so there's this other, there's this enormous mobilization coming up, and there's all this energy coming up. And I think that if we're going to do it right, we've got to look to our history. Right? We've got to look to the history of this movement and what happened in the past. Why did this movement that we're a part of, I'm assuming we're a part of it. I don't know if you consider yourself a part of the climate movement. But why did this movement fail this other time? And what are we going to do differently this time? So it's really important. And that letter is called An Open Letter to One Sky from the Grassroots. So I'll ask Kay to send it out to everyone afterward. OK, so what do I do? How does this come back to me? I work with the Tompkins County Climate Protection Initiative. I work with young folks. We do a summit every 2 years, and we do a couple of things in between. We do trainings and different activities and mini campaigns here and there, if we can manage it. So the youth climate move, so TICP in this process is integrated with the youth climate justice movement, which has this sort of analysis of history, this analogy of power, privilege, positionality, intersectionality, which is looking at the intersections of things like class, race, gender, colonization, nationality, all these different pieces that come together, and that we kind of think of in the youth climate movement as if we're going to solve any of these problems, it's kind of common sense that we have to look at how all these things interact. OK, so I've actually gotten to most of the other things that I was going to say so far. This is great. So let me skip ahead to the next section. So the youth climate movement is sort of taking this analysis of history and this analysis of what the movement has done and moving it forward. There are three particular strategies that I see folks pursuing. And I'm going to wrap up after this. This is my last thing. One is radical reform. So radical reform of policy, right? So you don't have to, so short of like a revolution where everything changes, there's some radical reforms you could make. Example of radical reform in the past, or something very close to radical reform, would be the New Deal, right? It dramatically transformed who had power in the country. There was an article that came out in The Atlantic on reparations for slavery. This would be a radical policy reform. in the United States. Repealing something like Citizens United would also have radical implications for how politics is done in the United States. A radical reform in the opposite direction, so moving away from what we need, would be something like NAFTA, right? NAFTA deregulated quite a bit, caused quite a bit of problems, took a lot of control out of the hands of people and put it into the hands of corporations and sort of governing elite classes. Right, so there's more stuff coming up. So the second strategy is, aside from radical reform, it's building alternative institutions. So we have this great institution called Alternatives Federal Credit Union. It's also a CDFI. CDFIs are institutions that are built to help people help themselves. Their intention is to build wealth in communities where wealth has been historically divested. So other types of alternative institutions, worker cooperatives, things along those lines. Things that sort of don't rely on changes of policy, don't rely on existing institutions, but build alternative institutions that when another system collapses, these institutions can fill that space. Because I mean, ultimately, we kind of are expecting the system we're in to collapse. So what are we building to do it instead?
Lifeboat.
Yeah. A lot of the folks that I see working on this sort of new economy stuff, alternative institutions, also say that alongside the new economy, alongside the alternative institution stuff, we have to have an anti-oppression framework, which means that we understand history and who actually has access to the types of things we're building. Especially when we look at the composition of the mainstream environmental movement and sort of who's represented.
So can I ask for clarification? So that would be like distributed energy grid kind of thing. Would that be an example of an alternative as opposed to our big united grid?
Yeah, and questions of like who owns it, who operates those types of things, right? There are actually a bunch of examples of, like the town of Greene, for example, has its own utility. It owns and operates its own utility. I found this out today, actually, but there are examples of it around the country. Then the third strategy, aside from radical policy reform, alternative institutions, is nonviolent direct action, right? And so what do we use nonviolent direct action for? We tend to use it for stopping bad things or protecting good things. So stopping bad things. I helped coordinate an action a year ago over in Seneca Lake where we blockaded that terrible, terrible idea to store liquefied natural gas basically under the lake. That's stopping a bad thing. The Keystone XL, the blockades have been happening along the Keystone XL pipeline, people putting themselves in pipes, locking themselves in machinery, sitting in trees. These are stopping bad things. Protecting good things, look at things like eviction, right? So after foreclosure, after the housing crisis and there's all these foreclosures happening, people stopping bank agents from foreclosing homes, actually getting in the way and saying, you cannot foreclose this home. People live here. That's protecting a good thing, right? In a way. I mean, you could probably say protecting a good thing is stopping a bad thing for any of these sorts of things. Yeah, so those are the three strategies. Oh, and one last thing, real quick. I know I've been talking for like a long time. I'm probably over 7 minutes. I aimed for 5.
You're very engaging.
So one thing that I'm trying to do, specifically as a young person, is I'm trying to stop thinking about crisis, the climate crisis, and stop thinking that this is something new. There are a lot of crises that have been happening for the last 400 and 500 years. A lot of very particular types of crises that have happened since the point of European contact with the North American continent. And there have been communities and people and organizations and movements that have been fighting and winning in the face of crisis for much, much longer than people have been worrying about the climate crisis. And I think that the notion of crisis is something that we create to try to mobilize people to take action. But I think that if we're going to sustain this fight and win, we've got to look a little deeper than saying this is the most urgent thing that's ever happened. There are a lot of very urgent things that are going to happen. People have been fighting, and I see that there are people who've been fighting for generations before me, and there will be people fighting for generations after me. And if I want to be part of that timeline of this sort of slow moral arc of history, I need to get out of the crisis mindset. So, and I hear this coming up too, among other folks that I work with who are around. Came up sort of through the youth climate movement. So, okay, that's it.
All right. Thanks, Reed. So I'm Don Barber, and I'll introduce myself. I'm a small business owner, a farmer, an elected official, and I have abiding love for the small section of the world that we live in because that is my birthplace. And as a grandfather, I am pained every day by the socioeconomic and environmental condition the world my grandchildren are entering. And so I'm here to tell you about action steps that I've taken. So this is actually making some things happen. And so I'll just share those stories briefly with you. And I'm an elected official, and in 2004, Community Energy came to the Caroline Town Board and wanted to have us participate in a program where we would guarantee to buy a certain amount of wind energy in the form of electricity for the upcoming year. And of course, this was in December. The town board already passed the budget. So the town board members donated their salaries to pay the premium so we could purchase wind energy. And Community Energy put this in the paper, actually in several papers, and it turns out that the citizens out of our town came to us and said, this is a great idea. We should buy 100% of our energy, not just 27%. And so the citizens fundraised and raised enough money in 1 year to pay for 3 years. And they got funding from outside of Tompkins County, outside of the state of New York, outside of the United States for this program. And it was very gratifying. And as a result, our Energy Conservation Independence Group came up, was formed. And one of the first things they did was a program called Lighten Up Caroline, where we provided this would be a compact fluorescent light bulb to every household in our town, 1,400 households. They were all distributed in one day by either bicycle, horseback, foot, or hybrid car. And there was a big splash about it. People were waiting for it. And there also was an opportunity to talk about ways to conserve energy. And so it was an educational experience as well. Community members were involved sewing bags. There were hand-sewn bags to deliver these. It was a great community building activity. So that's an example of how you could take this idea and actually make it grow beyond that. Many of you may be aware that in the town of Caroline is one of 3 towns that participated in Solarized Tompkins Southeast last year, which was much bigger than our wildest dreams. We had hoped to put up 100 kilowatts of power, and it turns out we put up more than 400 kilowatts of power. And the Solar Tompkins program, which is going on right now, is just building on that with the opportunity to, they're trying to put up they're hoping to do 2 megawatts of power in Tompkins County, which would be a huge change in the amount of solar that's produced here. So this is just how a movement gets started and how it builds, and success builds success for sure. Also in the town of Caroline, we needed an office building, and so we decided that we would put one up. It was going to be very energy efficient. It's heated by the earth and powered by the sun. There's actually no fossil fuel combustion anyplace. So it's a pretty interesting building. Our electric bill, which is also a heat bill, is $75 a month for a building. So we're saving taxpayers money every day through this process. So I will state that I'm not necessarily an organizer, but I've participated in many different organizations and many different activities that have been successful. And it starts with people coming with a basic feeling inside that they want to do something positive. They want to make a change. And they work together and they find a way that they can build off each other's energy, and then things happen. And I've been fortunate to be part of all those. And I wanted just to pick up on one of Reed's things that he made about political power. So being a local official, I was involved whenever many municipalities around were deciding whether they should ban natural gas drilling in their town or not. And it turns out that the grassroots control the dialogue about natural gas and its benefits and its and the risks that were associated with it. And in doing that, the citizens of the town actually were the ones that decided that we would ban natural gas. The town board did the voting, but the citizens had already decided long before that. And so that's the political power, and grassroots is the political power. I think all the speakers tonight have have really talked about that grassroots power. So I have one last thing I wanted to share. This is a request from Gay. It's about a new idea that's coming up. And so this is called Communergy circles. So this would be community members who want to host a talking circle on climate activism. And she says we would work on these together in late summer and test them in the fall. We're looking for people ready to provide some leadership and offer basic organizing skills who can help recruit and then host 4 sessions on community in the fall. We are focusing on the positive aspects by using the word community for our circles work together. She goes on to say, participants in the pilot circles will be engaged from the beginning with the goal of making these movement buildings, again, here comes the term yeast, making these movement building starter yeast that can be shared and tweaked and adapted by others. Sustainable Tompkins will provide the initial framework, reading material, and facilitator guides. Our staff will co-host all pilot circles so we can observe results, assess the catalyst role, and mentor potential circle leaders. A circle summit of participants from all circles will share outcomes and planned actions and envision next steps. So this is really building on activism and organizing. That's what this is all about. So Karen, who is our executive staff person, is going to be passing out a card for you to fill out if you so desire your interest in being on a community circle. And so there's a box to put them in. There's also more information about community circles at the back table. So I encourage you to take one. It's an opportunity to build on what's happening at these salons. Those of you who have been to these salons, one of them or more, are recognizing that this is a real opportunity and there's a lot of energy here. Excuse me?
Using the back of the card, the front, it's
Yeah.
scrap.
Yeah.
Just for a change.
This is part of our reuse strategy. So we use, and it works. It's very effective, as long as you put an X on the side that you're not writing on.
Can we give an example of a community circle?
Please.
So Gay has already been leading some community circles in Lansing, and they've been really, really exciting and effective. So she's working with Lansing residents who wanted to make some sort of have a sort of think-do, get together in a small group, 10, 15 people, do some learning, say about community-owned renewables. So they did some learning, and then they said, well, let's now do the doing part. How about holding a workshop for the community on microhydro? So people can learn about microhydro, which is one very easy way to generate your own power, just if you have water running through your property. And it would also be an easy way for us to do that on a larger scale using a larger body of water and have it be community owned with people investing in it, similar to the Black Oak Wind Farm, if you're familiar with that. So creating an alternative, as you were saying. And they did that. They held a microhydro workshop in Lansing, and 70 people came, and 3 of them signed up on the spot for site visits, to have their property checked out. And it's really neat. So what she's asking for are people who want to be involved in the leading of such circles. Who knows what that circle will decide, what kind of project it decides it wants to take on, but it will be something that those people those individuals can get excited about, and it might lighten up Caroline, or it might create microhydro in Lansing, or it might, who knows. But that's where the grassroots stuff begins. So if you're excited but you don't know quite how you want to get involved, you can tell us that as well. Like, contact me with general information. Let us know.
We'll also be following up with everyone who came to all of the salons about this, and asking about your experiences with the salons, as well as what your interest would be around having a circle in your community.
Thank you, Karen.
Excuse me, what information do you want on this card exactly? Who you are, how to reach you, and your idea for a circle, or?
Do you want to be involved, and if so, how?
Yep. So we need your contact information for sure. All right. So we've been working an hour here, and it's time to move on to letting you speak. So this is time for you to share your truth. This is actually not a debate. We're not trying to convince someone that you're right, but we want to listen to what you have to say and explore those ideas. So we have, we're going to try to be organized for this. This is our enforcer. His name is Tom Shelley. And so Tom will actually be selecting the order that people speak in, and he'll try to keep track of that, so that's his focus. He's not going to listen to anything you say, only who speaks first. And then we have Jeff's carrying a microphone around, and when you get the microphone, hold it to talk into it. Otherwise, he will be doing one of these to you, and that means to put it up to your mouth. The reason for that is so that we can have good audio for our video. And we have a question from George. Or you want to speak right off the bat? He's getting, all right, so let me just remind you of the first question we're speaking of, because George already knows it. He's sitting closest to the sign, so he's been staring at them. So here, this first question is, at a personal level, where have you encountered barriers and where have you had success when taking climate action as a voter, taxpayer, consumer, culture maker, or community member? And George.
As a voter, I'm very frustrated that I can't effectively vote Green Party. I know they play red and blue against each other like a couple of, dummy, ball game teams, and you don't get to, even see your issue on the ballot sometimes. I haven't quit voting, but I wish there was something we could do so that there was that a Green Party vote wasn't a throwaway.
One. Microphone. A lot of my focus on climate action is how to have different sectors and constituencies work together that usually don't. Basically, I believe that when environmental groups understand the urgency that justice-oriented groups feel about hunger and about widening inequality, and they become identified with it and advocates for it, that creates a bond that doesn't exist right now. That there's a profound lack of trust that exists that divides groups, even though we've made progress on it. And I feel like that's a huge barrier, and it goes both ways as well, but it has to tilt from the groups that are perceived as more privileged towards the activist groups that are perceived as less privileged. And I feel like the way I've had successes with it is through developing trusting relationships in different organizations. That if you try to do it on a broad scale, it really is hard. But when you have close relationships, and then through those relationships people meet each other, or people come to meetings with you, and they take interest, then it's possible to bridge the divide, so that the different urgencies that you feel about feeding your children versus the collapse of your ecosystem are obviously the same when perceived through the lens of commonality and food justice. But generally, we tend to identify differently. So I would just say trusting relationships to help each other broaden our identities are really, really crucial. And I've had, I would say small successes.
Name, please, can you say your name?
Yeah, my name is Paul Moore. My challenge has been in trying to figure out where to start in terms of there's so many pieces of the puzzle that need to be addressed, and it seems like concurrently. And what I've been doing is battling with thoughts in my head, trying to organize them so that there's a first step that's a good leverage point to move. And I keep coming back to values, common values with other people that go above and beyond the polarization that we sit in. And the closest thing I can come to is appreciation and the presence of a loving human being at the other end of a conversation, kind of similar to what you were saying about relationship. But there's a real frustrating passion about wanting to make things real sooner than they probably can be in time. And I get really frustrated about that because it doesn't seem like there is too much time. So I get, I stop myself in a way. But I keep plugging away day by day and write little notes here and make phone calls there and send emails here. But I think my own overthinking maybe about the hugeness of the problem stops me from getting involved in a way. So what I've done is, on a totally flip side, you know, I stack wood at home tonight before I come, and we're trying to add solar panels to the house, and we're trying to find out the best way to optimize energy so that we have the least green footprint. But I feel like that's moving a deck chair on the Titanic. And it's just, it's painful. I mean, it's good, but it's not enough. And it's like, how could 6 billion people somehow remember that the earth counts and it's not owned by anyone? And somehow divest corporations of that power that they have. You know, and the only thing that comes to me is requiring that corporations have ethics. And that seems like a stupid idealistic thing, but it seems like if the corporate charter could be withdrawn as of a certain date, and it would be reinstated the next day if they signed basically the Oath of Hippocrates or something like that, the Boy Scout Pledge or something else, to say, this is what I commit to, and one of my stockholders for the rest of the term of existence of this corporation is planet Earth. And it just shifts everything out to the long-term strategic instead of the quarterly report. So I keep battling with all those different things, and that's where I am right now.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Kim, and I just want to, that's such a fascinating set of ideas. I think one of the things that I've done in my messaging, I have given about a dozen talks called You, Me, Birds, and Climate Change. I'm an ornithologist, and so I get to speak to bird groups. And one of my main messages in my talk is start with who you are and what you know and what your skill set is, because there's no one single answer to what we can do to fight the climate change. Like, I think for me, the turning point in my battle with this issue was when I realized I stopped asking myself, what should I do? And it became, what should I do? Me as my particular set of strengths and power and influence, and then also my weaknesses, etc. And so this fight is so massive, and it's so long-term, and it's so multifaceted that you can figure out who you are, where you fit in society, what your skills are, what your weaknesses are, and say, where does that place me to have the biggest influence possible? And I think a lot of us will come to see, and so that's your place of power. I think it's about identifying your own place of power. And for me, it was, I'm a scientist, I speak to bird audiences, I like to talk in public, etc. But it wasn't necessarily going door to door. Whereas for some people, that is their thing. So I think a lot of us struggle with that. What should we do? And it's like, no, you figure out what you're going to do. The other idea that I try and express, and I think it's interesting in relationship to some of your guys' conversations, is I've started to develop this idea of a climate change portfolio, which is you can get really wrapped up. You only have, $100 to give to charity or 10 hours to give of your time. What is the charity that's going to make the difference? And you just can't do that to yourself. That's like saying what investment in what stock option is going to give me return 60 years from now. The fact is it's complicated. We don't exactly know, and there's tons of great work being done. So rather than put the pressure of having the answer, create a portfolio that represents your values. Like science literacy is an important part of the climate change problem in terms of perception. So climate change literacy is something I invest in, or invest in. But then also what is it? Corporate money in political. I understand that that's a problem. So in my little portfolio is this distribution of my values and how I understand the problem and how I understand they're going to work. And part of my work is to talk with the people around me, learn from them, other organizations like CCL.
Yeah.
That's a new one for me. It sounds very similar to 350 or Climate Reality is also really big on the carbon tax, trying to get that sort of thing in. I mean, so we learn from each other about our favorite organizations, and we can find out which ones are doing things we feel excited about. So I think that is the definition of grassroots, is this identification of who you are, where you are, and instead of feeling unpowerful because of that, realizing that is it. That is the form of power that most of us, the vast majority of human beings on this planet, will have. And that's the means by which movements occur, and that's how the changes are going to occur.
I'm Kathy Russell. I'm a retired professor at SUNY Cortland. I'm a philosopher. And I would like to flag the stance that we get out of the crisis frame. I came to the first two of these people's salons, and then I came to this one. I had to miss the last one because I was with my grandchildren. And one of the things that upset me, and it seemed to me to cause dissension in the first session, was the claim that this is new. This is a crisis. We haven't seen this before. This is such a crisis. And then there was, I don't remember, I'd have to watch the video, but there was some kind of link to slavery. And like it wasn't as bad as, I don't remember. But like, this isn't as bad as slavery was, my God. I mean, this is worse than slavery was. That's the way I heard that thing. Because there was this analogy made. And and it's like, oh, what's new now? And I said, well, tell that to the woman who was a slave and raped in 1745. She was in a crisis and all. And so it just seemed like that this is something new. We've never faced this before. This is a crisis. Really, for me, built disunity as a person who's spent most of my life in the struggle against racism. And it just really was upsetting to me. And it seemed like it was disturbing to some others. And I want to thank you for bringing that framework up, that we get out of this. This is new, this is a crisis, now we have to do something.
Anyone else? You can just speak.
Oh, I'm attached to a microphone, or the other way around. Just to really quick on the crisis thing. I think I used to think of climate change as kind of like an umbrella of like the most important thing that was kind of over every other issue. And thanks to a lot of the work of folks who work, a lot of feminists and a lot of anti-racist organizers, that perspective of mine has changed to sort of think of like climate as like a spoke around like a circle of a lot of issues that are interconnected, right? And sort of the like sort of transformed vision of collective liberation is at the center, right? And there are all these sort of issues that kind of intersect, rather than thinking of it as like the most important thing. It's one of many important things. Yeah, that's all.
Hi, my name is Linda Iannone, and I just wanted to say, reiterate some of what you've said, which is the power in our own stories and connecting with one another, how powerful that is. And I heard something somewhere, I don't think it was with this group, but when there is a problem or a crisis, sometimes the best solution is to increase the size of the problem, like you're saying, so that we can see the interconnection in all things. And the power with connecting with one another and sharing our humanity and being able to tell our stories, not just lecture to people, is very, very empowering through organizing and through ourselves. So my little story, what I've been doing, if I can resonate with you or you or you, it builds community, and that builds movement. Thank you.
Great. I think we're going to move on to the second question. And the second question is, what are good ways to get others to join you on a particular task or cause and get them to act independently instead of being passive recipients of information? How do we make more self-starters out of people who already share our concerns so we can spread like yeast?
This program brought to you by
some bread maker someplace.
I'm Kim again. And my metaphor that I use is enzymes, not yeast, but it's the same idea. When I saw the yeast, I laughed because I was like, enzymes, yeast. It's kind of, I don't know what I was going to say besides that, actually. Oh, how do we motivate others to act? Well, I think it's interesting going back to this crisis thing. I've had this ongoing conversation with a colleague of mine who says that the whole reason we use the word sustainability is because when we treat climate change like a crisis, you run the risk of stimulating climate denial or shutting them down because you instigate such fear. And there's studies that show that a lot of climate denial is brought about by the severe kind of crisis language that people use in talking about it. And so I see exactly what both of your points are about you don't want to invalidate other crises by elevating this as the king of all crises. At the same time, I have argued to my colleague that it is important that people understand there's an urgent timeline. I mean, I guess there's a difference between crisis without a timeline versus there's an urgent timeline associated with this problem. And the reason I want to talk about climate change with a sense of urgency is because I want people to understand that the timeline is extremely urgent. And so I guess I would ask that back to other people, which is where do you find the balance between making sure people understand the urgency, the timeline of this, and but without going over the top and pushing people into shutdown mode because they can't handle the severity of the reality.
Sure, Miranda.
I've struggled with that as well, and felt very shut down without even really knowing it, and have now come to the other side of it. When I want to speak first to, I want to speak to how I came to the other side of it and what how I'm managing that balance now, the balance of the urgency without overwhelming people. And this is to offer as you were saying, a bit of personal story, but that's the best we can do. So I was in the kitchen with my husband, we were listening to NPR, and there was a story came on talking about ice storms around Christmas and a lot of people dying. And I got really upset and I said, when are they going to get it? Like these big weather events happening again and again and people needlessly dying, why are we allowing this to continue? When are people going to connect the dots? And my husband said, I wish you wouldn't get so angry about this. So, so I got really angry. And I said, do you not want me to get angry, or do you not want me to just, do you want me not to share with you when I'm getting angry? So he could see that he had to, so being a good guy, the good guy that he is, he took a step back and he said, you're totally right to be angry. The state of the world is awful. I totally get why you're sad and angry. It's you know, it's still justified that you're upset. And then he went to his personal place, which is where the only place you have power, because nobody can argue with your personal truth. He said, all I want to say is, I remember a time when you weren't so upset about the state of the world, and it makes me sad. So he, in one sentence, acknowledged that I was fine right where I was at. I didn't have to change. And at the same time, this is where he was at, and I needed to hear that. So with him reflecting back to me that I had come to this really sad, fearful place, and that made him sad, I paused and I said, okay, I hear you. Thank you for, I'm going to keep being angry and sad. I'm going to keep being angry and sad. But I hear you that I should also try and be hopeful. I don't know how I'm going to be hopeful with the state of the world like this, but I'm going to try and be hopeful. So in that moment, suddenly, I made space for the possibility that I could be hopeful. I said, how am I going to be hopeful? Oh, I've been hearing about this group CCL for the last year. I heard about it from him and from James Hansen and But I kept saying no because I thought, well, but is it the best solution? And is it the best thing for me to be doing? I'm not a lobbyist. I'm someone who does XYZ. I do permaculture in my backyard. Why should I do this? And what I came to was, these people are hopeful. They're talking positively. They're not being doom and gloom. They're doing something constructive. And they're saying, to the best of our knowledge, this has a chance of succeeding on an urgent timeline. We think it'll work within 10 years. We know it's not the only thing that needs to work for everything to work out. But this is the piece that we've chosen for ourselves. We're well organized. We can support you. And I realized that not only do they need me, the answer to the question of why do they need me, why me, if I don't think I'm a lobbyist, is because they didn't have a chapter yet in Ithaca, New York. And if their idea was they need to have relationships with every congressperson, I said, okay, there's a role. Like, I'm a community organizer. I'm a volunteer coordinator. I can coordinate volunteers here. And I like diplomacy. I'm a Libra. I want to mediate. I want to work with people on both sides of the aisle. So that could be me. But mostly, the big aha for me was, I need them. I need to not be alone with my woodpile, muttering over this and feeling despairing and fearful. I need to connect with lots and lots of people so that I can feel a sense of progress and hope on a daily basis, and just know that we're working the problem. Maybe we have the wrong solution, but we're working the problem and we're doing it together. And have the trust that a month from now I could switch gears and join a different group, but at least I've started. I have to do that to be hopeful, for my sake and for my husband's sake and for my kids' sake. I have to start somewhere.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I got the mic before you started talking, and I just wanted to talk a little bit, not to belabor it anymore, but about actually what Miranda did to get me involved in CCL. I saw her speak way back in, what was it, February or something like that? Yeah. And I think the group was really good in answering the question, like, what motivates you to act and how to get others to join your cause, is asking people what they're passionate about and allowing them to steer the way that they can get involved. And so I found that personally very motivating. Miranda actually called me on the phone and we had a conversation about it, and it felt really personal. And I mean, I feel like that has to do a lot with what we've been talking about, having relationships with people. So anyway, that was what I was going to say before.
I'm Sasha. I've been working in nature education, environmental education, and this talk about engaging passive versus active action and finding our niches in the movement just reminded me of the difference between environmental education and environmental advocacy, which I've been learning some about. Education being the idea of giving people information with which to make informed decisions, but never telling them specifically what to do, whereas advocacy is more lobbying for or against legislation, for instance. I'm not sure where the community type projects would fall in between those, but for me it's been a personal thing thinking, am I content to continue to work in education and tell people things without ever getting to tell them what I think they should do, or moving into a sphere I don't know so much about, lobbying, lawmaking, all that. So just something to think about, thinking about those two kinds of work and the vocabulary we use around them and the different ways people are trying to go about it.
Hi. Okay, can you hear me? Yes. So I was involved in that discussion. I guess I'm still working on this question here about how can we make, how can we get others to, how can we communicate and get others involved in this by communicating our values. And I just want to touch back on that, the discussion that you mentioned from the first one about, because there's a tendency to try to connect this issue with other issues like gender issues and issues of race and things like that. And I'm very curious about the discussion of where we're trying to say, well, what's different about this? Why is suddenly this the biggest thing? And conveying the sense of urgency. I think this is absolutely, like, we have to convey this with great urgency because we have to talk about the consequences and I'm not sure that's been clearly elucidated anywhere maybe in the second one. I think we covered that a little bit, but I just want to state where I think this is going, right? So this is not unprecedented in the geologic history. There was something called, I think it's the Permian extinction, which happened 250 million years ago, and where there was a feedback system that happened. Basically, there was a 5 degrees C rise in the global temperature caused by some volcanic flows in Siberia, I think. And then that triggered, because there was these methane hydrates that melted all over the earth and released all this methane in the environment. Methane. How does that relate to the current events? Anyway, there was all this massive methane that was released, and that triggered another 5 degrees C. And guess what happened? The climate became inhospitable for all life. 95% of all life on planet Earth was wiped out in the matter of just, a few thousand years. In geologic time, that's a short little blip. So, all these other issues like race issues and issues of gender and all that stuff, I mean, I've been involved in that stuff in the past, but none of that stuff matters if we're all dead. So this is new, this is unique, this is unprecedented in human history, and I think it requires, I'm not sure what we need to do to get everybody involved, but it's an urgent matter, and we need to get everybody involved.
Hi, I'm Fred Balfour, and I just had voluntary surgery for a rotator cuff, so this is not permanent, although it feels like it. I'm a half-time resident here. My wife and I have 3 grandchildren under 8 here and 2 more grandchildren back in Somerville, Mass. Mid-40s daughters working in careers, and we help out a lot. So we go back and forth, come here on the 15th of the month, go back to Boston on the 30th of the month. Miranda made part of my brain light up with her description of CCL. And I really want to speak to this, how do we get people working? How do we get self-starters out of people? And some of the characteristics or the plan or the strategy of CCL mirrors exactly a capital campaign that I happened to get. I was made into a self-starter to run it at a small church about the same size as a Unitarian church here, but back in Newton, Mass, Congregational Church. I'm the out-of-the-closet atheist there. It's a church named after John Eliot, who converted a lot of the Indians back in, let's not get off into that. We wanted to run a capital campaign and make $650,000. The church annual pledge was about $180,000. How can we do 4 times the annual pledge to collect it over 3 years? We got a consultant who said, here's the structure, here's all the jobs that have to be done. There were about 50 or 60 active people in the church, and all of them were busy with church stuff. How do you get them signed up? Here's the steps that have to be done. There's some big steps, there's some small steps. What you do is you go to somebody's home and you sit down across the coffee table from them and you talk about how great the church is and what a wonderful home they have, and then you say, will you do this job? And I had to ask 2 or 3 people to do some fairly high-level jobs in this. This is not just going out Sunday afternoon, but actually recruiting people. And when you lay it out, the job is only this long, it takes you this much time, can you do it? And we built a hierarchy in about 3 or 4 weeks to do this set of tasks. And our $650,000 target was blown out of the water. We hit about $850,000. This was in 2007, 2008, when things were getting a little touchy. So how do you get self-starters? You go talk to them face-to-face. You tell them, here's the big picture, but here's the task I want you to do. Can you do it? Can you help out? And if you do, you'll be working with these other people, and it's a finite amount of time. In this case, it was like 8 or 10 weeks, and anybody had only 2 or 3 weeks. So it's a reaching out, it's a identifying a common thing, and it's making it sound doable and making you part of a bigger machine. So as I say, part of my brain lit up when you said that. So I'm enthusiastic about that. I'd like to learn more about the CCL.
Thank you. The only thing I would add to that is that when I sat down across the table from Sarah, I had a whole list in front of me, and I said, which of these things do you think would be manageable for you? Which things are manageable, and which things really excite you? Like, which things would you be excited to do, and which things could you be on call for as needed? And that's where you find people's power is, that's what's sustainable, is if you find, what are you motivated to do? And what would you do for the cause if you had to? And we're giving people choice. That's where, and I find this as a mother of 2 small kids. If you give them a choice, are you going to bed now or in 5 minutes? They feel like it's not really a choice, but they feel like they have power. And I'm not saying the CCL is doing that, but rather that's where people feel empowered is when they get to choose. They see all the options. They know in concrete terms what they would be sacrificing if they took on this thing or that thing, and they say, that I can do. Yeah, and in the context of relationship building, face-to-face, totally. And that the relationship building also happens with the politicians is really powerful as well. So, thanks.
So since this is my second time, I'll try to be brief, but I have some feeling of urgency, so what can I do? I think that thinking that we've got to all get together on this because we're going to be dead sounds compelling, but the thing about ecosystems collapse and climate disruption is that it's a symptom. It's not the core problem. So the core problem, as Reed was pointing out, is that we're in the middle of a failing global economic system and a failing worldview. And we have to keep our eyes on the prize of collective liberation into a different way of thinking about ourselves as part of the earth and as part of the world, and of thinking ourselves as a world family and liberating ourselves from the tyranny that we've all sort of taken up. But if we sit and try to convince people that even though you're hungry, it's about the ecosystem collapsing, we won't have that common ground of collective liberation. So yes, it's very urgent, but it's very urgent that we focus together as an Earth family.
Thanks. My name is Una. It's funny, I used to speak publicly, but I'm clearly out of practice because I'm like nervous to say what I want to say right now. So I made notes. I really want to build off of what he just said and some of the things I've heard, and kind of the combination that I am putting together in my brain right now of this crisis stuff and also like what's immediate and what we need to deal with. And I think that, to be perfectly honest, if the climate crisis is the most immediate crisis in your life, then like you don't live like a lot of people live on this planet or in this town. So like for me, I'm a queer woman. That means that I'm scared of getting gay bashed, and it means I'm scared of being raped. And if I were a person of color, I'd be scared of being shot by the police or some vigilante. If I was a migrant without papers, I'd be scared of being deported. Those are all really immediate things that are real to people, just as real as the ecosystem collapsing. In fact, more real because they're right in front of people, and they're right in front of me every day. I think what happened in Santa Barbara is a really good reminder of that. And so I feel like that actually really ties into motivating people, because if we, and I say we, and I also, part of it's me and part of it isn't, but I think if we approach things from the perspective of people who benefit from a system, and that system, the system I guess actually is capitalism, and also that system is the government that we live under. If we benefit from that, then we move forward asking from that what we think we can get, but we're also doing that in the context of who we are. And so I feel like when we talk about motivating people, like I'm not motivated to go ask the government for things, because the government, I don't feel entitled to the government doing anything for me. I feel motivated to do things myself and to make change in all kinds of different ways, but I think that we kind of think these two things are separate. Like, why aren't people acting? And it's like, well, and like, why does like, you know, why this is the second salon I've come to, and I've started coming to events since I moved to Ithaca, and like, I'm very conscious that like, this is not what Ithaca looks like. This room is not what Ithaca looks like at all. And it's not what the United States looks like, and it's not what the world looks like. And we are coming from a place of like who we are and the privileges that we have, and then we're like, well, why aren't people motivated? It's like, well, we have to remember that like people are motivated by a lot of different things, and that like maybe we need to think about, you know, like I look at that and it says, you know, voter, taxpayer, consumer. Like none of those things are part of my identity. You know, like maybe I vote and I have to buy things and I have to pay taxes, but like that's not where my power comes from. You know, and so I feel like we really need to shift our perspective and remember the very, very, very privileged place that we live in the world, and how we're going to change things about ourselves as much as fixing a problem. Like, because actually we created this problem. And so maybe we need to listen to people who didn't create it or are most affected by it if we want to change it. And for me, like, that means being open to working with people who don't want to lobby the government or don't want to like have a capitalist solution. So anyway, I guess I just feel like all of those things are really connected, and I think that when we think about motivating things, we need to remember that like, also this is new to us. Like the like devastation of biodiversity is not new, and I really appreciate what Reed said. Like this is a at least 500-year-old problem that has been going on, and so like it feels new because this could affect us being like finally getting to the most privileged people on the planet. And so I just really think that like we need to take that into account when we think about what motivates people and like where we start as individuals and as people in a community.
So thanks. I'm going to actually read the third question. We've already moved into the culture a little bit, and just you can all be like politicians and answer the question you wanted to have asked. So feel free to answer the second question here. But so the last question is about, what about reaching across the culture gap where climate change has gotten intertwined with other belief systems? There are a lot of new alliances out there. How can we build more? So we have a couple people in the queue. That's questions on the table as well as the others that are out there. Okay, Jeff. You need to give them some direction.
Who's up?
Karen.
Back. There's Karen. And then the person here. You're next. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to be like a politician and answer the previous question.
Perfect.
So whenever I think about what motivates people to act, I remember the scene from Tom Sawyer when he's whitewashing the fence, and he basically tricks his friends into doing the work for him because he makes it look like fun. And Reed is gone. But one of the things that Reed said that stuck with me was about the beer and pizza, because I think when you bring people together for a little fun and a little beer and pizza, you can get them to start thinking about acting. And so I wish that we had beer and pizza at the salons. And
this is the Ithaca Bakery.
At my community circle, we'll have beer and pizza.
Hi, I'm Nancy Jacobson, and I teach up at Ithaca College, and I teach a first-year seminar on climate change. And so it's been kind of interesting to, I've sort of seen my teaching change in similar ways. So, a couple of years ago, I had it ending with a simulation of the UNFCCC climate change, where all the countries were, putting on the table what they wanted, and it was really interesting. But I think everyone left just so down. This is hopeless. We're never going to get there. And so last year, I started ending with creating change. And they could choose. And the choice, yeah. So, it was totally open-ended. And there were some great projects that they wrote letters. One guy wrote a letter to the mayor of Chicago about how they should change their bicycle lanes to be safer so that their bicycle share program would work more effectively. And it was like, I couldn't have thought of things like that. And it just left, everyone was so much more up and feeling empowered. But I think getting at this culture gap, there's also a part in there where, there's been work by the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication, and they've identified 6 Americas. And so a new thing I'm going to do this year is start out, which one do you identify with? And so really start making it more personal from the very beginning. And all these things that you guys have been saying just reinforces these sort of inklings that I should do this. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this now. And hopefully I can make some arrangements so that maybe my students could come to your organizations and see what it's all about. And so really get more of a sense of empowerment and out of the classroom. So.
Hello, I'm Kev. I've been researching this thing called Schweebs. I don't know if any of you guys have seen these things. They're basically like a bicycle monorail. And the way it works is you have this tube, and in the front it's convex, and on the back it's concave. So say if somebody's going slow in front of you, you're just going to link in, and it will give you like twice the power. And they also, so say that you're going this speed on a bike, you get twice the amount of energy because the bullet shape in the front as well. And the way it works is it runs on some type of monorail. This guy in New Zealand made it in 2008. And I think it's a really cool thing. I mean, you obviously got to get by like some oil companies and whatnot. And there is some structure to it. But I think this is a good town to do it, Especially it gets cold here. I don't stay here in the winter, but it's it'd be a good thing for you guys who stay in the winter as well. Yeah, I mean, you should all look at it. I think it's like SCHWEEB. And I think we should write to this guy and see if we can get him going here.
Awesome. Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm going to be a real politician, and I'm going to answer the first question. One problem, a barrier that I've had is the entire banking and financial system is working against us in many different ways. I have a very personal example of how this happened. My wife and I refinanced our house, and we got a big chunk of change out, and we put a new wood-burning furnace in to be a little more carbon neutral. And we put in a very high efficiency combination hot water heater boiler. And then we were going to get a nice sort of loan for about $6,000 to do energy conservation measures, you know, air sealing and all that good stuff. And we only had about roughly 40% energy efficiency for the house, which is not very good. So we were looking forward to the $6,000 and made the, 27-page NYSERDA application. It was really laborious to do in the first place. And everything was going fine. Went back to NYSERDA, and our loan was denied. And we couldn't figure out why. Yeah. And we got the paperwork back in the mail. Turns out the credit union thought we had 4 mortgages because the first 2 mortgages had not fallen off the credit ratings, and we didn't have enough money to pay 4 mortgages. We could only pay 2 mortgages. So it's, from our vantage point, it's a real failure of the way the banking system is set up and operating, that the credit agencies don't report for months past the events that actually transpire in your life financially. And so there are all sorts of, it's kind of a minor detail in a way for many people, I suppose, but it's just an example of how the whole banking and financial structure, being controlled by the rich corporations and the giant banks, is working against us as little individuals trying to do our own thing.
I can't remember.
I just have a quick question. It was inspiring and to me, the second session of the People's Salon, when there were so many people who were opposed to capitalism, and were talking openly about their opposition to capitalism. And many people even mentions the S word, the socialism concept. And I know there's a group called System Change, Not Climate Change. And I've been attracted to some of the things that they've been doing, and I wonder if anybody has any contacts with them or if that's anything that we would be interested. Because, there's all these national, international movements. It's like, who do you connect with? And has anybody connected with them?
You have?
Again, the mic is on my body. I work with a group, or I've worked with in the past, a group called the New Economy Coalition. That's specifically it was really cool to be in a room 2 weeks ago with 600 other anti-capitalists, everything from socialists to anarcho-syndicalists, folks who are capitalism working, and here are some actual things we can do. So New Economy Coalition is a really good group to connect with. They have a lot of good information coming out. And actually, in town, the former director of the Responsible Endowments Coalition, who knows a lot about alternative institutions and alternative financial mechanisms that are non-exploitative. Dan Apfel lives here. He'd probably be going, oh, Reed's talking about me right now. But he knows a lot. He's working with AFCU a little bit now as well. So, yeah, but I'd recommend NEC, New Economy Coalition.
I wanted just to pick up on Fred's comment about how do we get others to join us. And I think the question really requires us to introspect on how we got ourselves to get involved. And it usually involves some kind of action on our part. It's not reading an email, it's not sending out a letter, but it's actually talking to someone, it's attending group sessions like this, it's speaking, giving your voice. your emotions a voice, that's how we get involved. And so Fred talked about how he was able to get a community to come together, and it was by personal contacts, and people who run political campaigns know that's exactly how you get people involved. Boots on the ground, people meeting people, making the personal contact. You call them up on the phone and you ask them a specific question, and you engage them. That's how people get involved. So how we get other people involved is to have the conversations. So we talked about community. You're leaving here the meeting tonight having more ideas, and you've been exposed to different things, so you can continue having those conversations. And we build a grassroots movement by just talking to other people and asking them to help us with the load that we're carrying. And I think we're all learned a little bit more tonight as a result of that. So it is 8:55, and we do have an opportunity for people to make announcements about activities coming up, so this is a great time. So I know that this group has got other things they're working on. So what's happening sustainably? Okay, Kathy or Kay, you got to talk.
Right. Okay, but June 30th.
Please, right there.
You've got a lot of the information about it. The
We
June
can do
30th
it.
forum.
We can tag team it.
I can't remember what title we ended up with.
Clearing the air.
Clearing the air. I thought we changed it
so
actually.
great.
But it's looking at the issue of the Cayuga plant, and not only what are the issues around the closing of the plant itself, but what are alternatives that the community should be looking at in terms of revitalizing the economic base, looking at different ways to really help the community not just be dependent on a single power plant like this, but to find other ways to support itself economically in sustainable ways. And so the forum is Monday, June 30th, 7 to 9 at the Unitarian Church.
All right. Did it? Going back here.
This has nothing to do with climate, but I just wanted to make an announcement. My name is Linda Iannone. I just finished my training to be a navigator for the healthcare reform here in Tompkins County. And Saturday at Southside, we're going to be having the Juneteenth Festival, and I'll be there taking your names if anybody you know needs health care or to enroll in health care. That affects us economically big time and in many different ways. Anybody that does not have health insurance, please come see me.
I have an announcement. So this Saturday from 11 to 6 is the Juneteenth Festival at Southside Community Center. If you're interested in volunteering, you could come touch base with me after this. Or if you have a truck that you'd be willing to drive from like point A to point B a couple of times tomorrow afternoon, also come see me.
I've got a station wagon.
Well, let's talk. Let's talk. Okay. But 11 to 6 on Saturday is going to be music and food and
Really
good
fun.
stuff. Yeah.
At Southside, right here. It's on
Plain Street.
Plain Street, the Southside Community Center.
So
There are
if-
many groups there music.
If any of you have ever mused about having solar panels on your roof, it's actually possible for you to do. There's a Solar Tompkins event happening this coming year. It's happening right now with meetings around the county. And you can go to Solar Tompkins on the website to learn more. You actually can get into this for no money at all. You can lease the panels, and you'll be paying less per month than you're paying in electric bills right now. So there's really not a reason to not get engaged. So you can also buy the panels yourself. If we're trying to get to over 1 megawatt of power, we need a lot of people to join in, and we're going to make it happen, so you can be part of that effort.
There's a poster with a list of all the workshops. I don't need the microphone. There's a poster for Solarized Tompkins at the front door. I do have a Bob Rossi dropped off these flyers for the next scene event, which is Finger Lakes Food and Fracking. And it has a whole bunch of really awesome people are going to be speaking. Yesterday they just got Sandra Steingraber to agree to speak. It's Thursday, June 26th at 6 p.m. at Green Stars, the space. And the flyers are here.
since there seems to be a lull in talking about community events happening, I did just want to remind you that this kind of programming can't happen without your help. I know not everyone's in a position to give, but if you can give happily and comfortably, we really appreciate your help. There are baskets at the door and on the buffet table, or you can become a Sustainable Tompkins member on our website. Thank you.
So I just want to remind everyone of our sponsors tonight. So PPM Homes underwrote the videotaping, and you'll be able to see yourself on TV in another couple of weeks. Also, Ithaca Bakery for the refreshments in the back, and please fill your pockets on your way out, because there's only a few people that take it if you don't. Also, the Park Foundation, and then finally Chris McConkey and his team for doing the videotaping, and Thomas. Thank you.